Terry, thank you for joining us. And, um, you know, uh, I did approach you because of some questions about psychophysiology and the telepsychiatry or telepsychology or treatment via the internet. But then I read a little bit more of your book, and I wonder, would you share with us some of your ideas about intuition
Oh,
and,
sure.
and maybe also some of your concept about how do we really sense each other? Is it right brain to right brain, and some of those concepts?
Absolutely. I think I've come to intuition because right from the start in my graduate training, I was uncomfortable watching other people work and thinking I could learn from that process. It instead made me contract and shrink away from what was happening. And so I realized I needed to trust myself. I needed to find the work from within. And right from the start, happily, I felt that I could do that. And I have come to believe, especially as I've been trained in and learned more about interpersonal neurobiology, that we all use intuition all the time. Unless we're doing a really cookie cutter formulaic approach to psychotherapy, we use intuition because intuition connects what's unique in me to what's unique in the person I'm sitting with. And only intuition can do that. It's the most complex combination of sensation, emotion, cognition that exists. And yes, I do believe it is a right brain to right brain kind of process. And I've also come to believe that we try to open up intuition in the people we work with, and that's actually a higher state of healing and consciousness in everybody.
So it's you find it via your practice, and you say at the beginning you didn't learn it in psychotherapy school, or what was your background education?
Well, I went to I have to be careful here maybe a little bit, but I went to UCLA, got my PhD there, and at the time the focus was cognitive behavioral therapy. I had a tea with a professor named Jerry Goodman, who advised me not to do a dissertation in anything that really mattered to me. So I joined the Cog Mod squad, and I did a dissertation in cognitive behavioral therapy where I was trying to look for signs of depression in people. It was a prospective study in people before and in between depressive episodes, and I didn't believe that existed, and indeed we didn't find them, because even back then I had the sense that affect was more primary than cognition, and that affect is what helps shape cognition. So I unfortunately don't feel like I did learn very much in graduate school about how to do clinical work, other than having fantastic opportunities for internships and being thrown into practice and learning from doing. I veered to the side with Gestalt training back then. This was in the 1980s, and I learned a lot from that. And then I also learned guided imagery at UCLA's Neuropsychiatric Institute from a woman named Marielle Fuller, who was quite amazing, and learned hypnosis. And my primary love was in nonlinear science, which I've been studying for 30 years. And I particularly love fractal geometry, chaos theory, and complexity theory. And the chaos theory in particular taught me that no matter how well we understand what's going on now in a complex system, we can't predict what's going to happen. And I think that's also a sort of a boost for the importance of clinical intuition now, that it's not very effective to try to use our left analytical, logical brain to figure out a plan and to figure out what's going to happen. It's much more effective to dive in, consult the body, let the relationship move both people, and then find out what happens in process. So all of these trends really came together to inform both clinical intuition as a nonlinear kind of sensibility, and also the neurobiology helped ground the abstract quality of the science I was studying. And then on the other hand, I have had deep body practices all along. So I've been doing yoga for almost 40 years, I think about 40 years. I dance 5 days a week. I was a near extreme skier, and I was a very avid rock climber. So all of that contributed to a bottom-up sense of movement and how to move, and my interest in creativity as well.
Would you define clinical intuition as different from regular intuition, or it's what would you say about this?
I would say that it's continuous. Clinical intuition is continuous with regular intuition. And from a neurobiological point of view, that I've identified two emotional motivational circuits in the brain that I think it comes from primarily, which are two mammalian circuits. So those of you who may not be familiar with Jaak Panksepp's 7 emotional motivational circuits, at the reptilian level, there's the seeking circuit, the rage circuit, the fear circuit, and the lust circuit. And then there's a mammalian level that adds the care circuit, the play circuit, and the grief, loss, panic circuit. I think that intuition is not only continuous, clinical intuition is not only continuous with regular intuition, but I think it's also continuous with what animals have and do, mammals in particular, and that it's very connected to the care circuit and to the play circuit. And I believe both of those are fundamental in clinical work.
Do you think it's only for those two systems? Don't you think that if we look on Stephen Porges' concept, that the first thing we are trying to see if this the one we speak with or that we approach is somebody who is dangerous for us, namely,
absolutely, sure,
or, yeah.
Absolutely, that the amygdala is part of it, the sense of danger or safety, the neuroception of danger and safety is kind of a first step, and a kind of intuition, but it's a different one. It's a more survival one that tells us whether we want to hang around, with this other person or not. And I don't think that one. Yes, I think when we work with people at the edges of their regulatory systems, then all of that comes into play too. So yeah, and everything is a whole brain experience in certain ways. So the autonomic nervous system and safety, calm, etc. is definitely all connected to intuition as well.
Okay, now let's try to play like with the here and now.
Okay.
We are two different persons. We have never met. How do we develop some kind of knowledge which might lead to intuition?
Okay. All right. Let's play. Let's start with you. So I've been talking for a number of minutes. Tell me about myself.
Okay. Um, well, it's not simple, but I would say, first of all, I am listening to the melody and the prosody of your speak, and I see a lot of variations. You're not speaking in a monotonic way. You're speaking very alive, and I do see the picture in the background, and I think it does tell me something. You see that picture. And it seems to me that we can synchronize quite quickly, and I wonder what it is. Is it our profession? Is it our interest in the other? So I'm kind of I feel very in ease with you, and you also make me curious.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, I would say that I resonate with everything you're saying. I think you're describing a kind of openness that both of us feel and have towards one another. And that curiosity is really both the essence of the seeking system as well as the play system.
Mm-hmm. Why is it part of the play system?
Curiosity? Well, because
yeah, sure. Sorry, it should be clear.
yeah, it's an interest for its own sake.
Yeah. So if we were in a session, and now I'm going to the deeper question in a way. You know, everybody, or not everybody, since Alan Shaw began speaking about the right brain to right brain, I think it is we all use this term, but don't you think there is something missing? How my right brain gives some information to your right brain? It should be, it's not, you know, somebody could have thought that it's really brain to brain direct discussion, but I assume it's not a direct, it's via our eyes, our ears, or maybe some people might believe it's really direct. What would you say?
Okay. So I'm in Alan Shaw's study group, so I've been with him for many, many years. And on the one hand, any sort of reductive talk about single structures of the brain bothers me from the nonlinear point of view, from a holistic point of view. On the other hand, I have learned enough to know there actually is something to that right brain to right brain. Let me see if I can explain it to you. And you can see it now with, there's a very new form of brain measurement that is very exciting for us therapists because it's called hyperscanning. And what it is simultaneous measurement of two brains in interaction with one another. And so all of a sudden we can see the kind of synchrony that you mentioned and that we're talking about. And we can see which parts of your brain and my brain get activated at the same time. It's really quite remarkable. And there is a right brain to right brain connection in close relationships and people that care with one another while they're speaking to one another. And there's also a really interesting thing. There's a fellow named Hassan at Princeton whose lab looked at speakers and listeners and simultaneity there, and found that there's a part of the listener's brain that actually activates before the speaker's brain, which is, the anticipation part is really very, very interesting. And you were mentioning prosody, but it's also gesture and a kind of opening ourselves up to hear what the other person is going to say. But there's another piece to the right brain to right brain communication, which is there's a wonderful book by Ian McGilchrist called The Master and His Emissary. I don't know if you have read it.
I'm not familiar with that.
I highly recommend it. He's a British psychiatrist who looks at right brain, left brain differences. The first half of the book is very, very precise physiological studies. And then the second half of the book is looking at the tilt of civilization from going from right to increasingly left. But one of the things that he emphasizes that most people don't know when you're talking about whole brain to whole brain is that at the level of conscious experience, it's only either our right brain or left brain that is activated in consciousness at any given moment, because the corpus callosum acts as an inhibitor of the other side. So it's more like a figure-ground relationship. When the perspective of the right brain comes forward, the left brain recedes. When the perspective of the left brain comes forward, the right brain recedes, like a figure-ground reversal relationship. And the other piece evolutionarily about it is that the most fundamental difference between the right and left brain is that the right brain is specialized for novelty and for unique perception, and the left brain is specialized for habit and for pattern recognition of familiar objects. And this difference goes back to the reptiles. And so it precedes even the evolution of the mammals. And so that's another reason why that novelty is deeper than anything else, like language and all that stuff, or creativity. It's really, that's the fundamental difference. It gives us a clue why we do want to engage right brain to right brain I would say right brain to right brain is what intersubjectivity actually is. Because without there being that right brain to right brain, there isn't that emergent feeling of something new coming between the two people. When it's left brain to left brain, then we're sitting back and we're calculating and we're defensively disconnected from one another. It's possible to have left brain to left brain. I think that's what people do, what lawyers do in a courtroom, for example. But I think that we really strive for novelty in conversation, and I don't think there's any chance for change if it isn't a right brain to right brain connection.
Coming back to my original question, do you think that our right brain can communicate now as they would have communicated if we sat in the same room?
Do you mean, do I think that there's a fundamental difference between us looking at each other through our screen versus being in the same room?
Yes, and specifically about
That's a little bit different. Yes, I think we can do right brain to right brain across the screen. Yes. Do I think there's a difference? Yes, but I'm not sure how significant that difference is.
You see, you speak a lot in your book about the body, although I think you speak quite a lot about the therapist body, what we the therapist feel in our body. From that point of view, nothing has changed. I mean, I can feel my body right now, if you are with me in the same room or not.
Right.
I think you also speak about the possibility that I sense your body, or I feel what happens in your body. And I think that is a clear difference between.
That is a clear difference. And this is something I've never said before, but I will say it now. When I do a Skype therapy with patients, my body is doing stuff my lower body is doing all sorts of stuff that I'm aware is not detectable. So I'm all over the place with my lower body. I will sit in straddle position. I will put my legs up all, in crazy places. I have my shoes off. I'm very irreverent in a way that I would never be in the room. So, I mean, that is one difference that I notice. But then there are other differences where things like pheromones that we're probably not even aware of, but sense of smell. And then the other thing, it's sort of interesting. I mean, you had me sit a little bit back so you could see more of me. You're sitting a little bit back, so I do have a sense of you being kind of far away. But sometimes people work with where it's just their faces in the screen, and when that's the case, there's a kind of a super normal stimuli of the face, and I'm aware of being super close, and so it's almost the opposite feeling. And I think when it's that there's something very intimate about that very, very looming face. And there's a very interesting difference neurobiologically within about 12 inches or so, 12 to 14, maybe 18 inches, when two people cross that threshold with one another. It taps into the very early infancy, mother-child dynamic of being
like when the mother holds the child.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and so sometimes I think there's a level of intimacy with that can't be gotten in the room, and so there's a funny combination of increased distance, and potential for increased intimacy with the teletherapy. There's another thing I've noticed that's incredibly intimate sometimes, which is sometimes when people are needing to be at home for whatever reason, sometimes they're in their bed, they're in their pajamas, they're in their bedroom, and it's it can be very intimate, especially if there's something going on by which they cannot leave their home. And it's a kind of a safe intimacy in a way. And yes. Notice that people don't ask if it's okay to do that. They just do it, which is really interesting that they do that. And I think that the distance allows for that intimacy in a way that it's less threatening or less up for question than they'd never do it. If we did a house call, I don't do house calls, but I can't imagine somebody answering in their pajamas or taking us to the bedroom unless that's a special arrangement because they're sick or this kind of thing. So it's fascinating to see those differences, and they don't always result in greater distance, is what I've noticed.
Yeah, I'm playing again with how would both of us feel if we don't know each other, and we entered into this conversation. I wonder how would it feel from the point of view if we were in the same room, and it is my intuition again, that I would be a little bit more tensed, a little bit more embarrassed, and I think this allows us somewhat to be very friendly and open, yet without the embarrassment and the tension. What would you think?
I think that I suspect that may be very true for us. I also suspect that each person there might be a difference in that for each person, that some people may feel more open and relaxed in person, and other people more open and relaxed with a little bit of the distance and the safety that this media allows. I'm guessing it isn't a universal kind of thing. Another thing I can say for myself, when I do use Skype or teletherapy, my preference is to do that with someone with whom I've started in the room. I find a huge difference there, that once I've had that body-to-body experience, it feels very continuous to then have to do it. For example, I have an actress in my practice who lives in Los Angeles, but she regularly goes overseas to Australia or to Great Britain, and then when she goes overseas, we use Zoom. And there's something about having started in body to body that feels very, very comfortable. When it's gone the other way, when I've started this way and then gotten into the room with the person, it's strange. And even I've had the experience of starting person to person and doing years of therapy with a particular patient, having that patient move to San Francisco, continuing on Skype for many years, and then having that person come back into the room years later. And that's strange because with all the aging differences, changes the whole gestalt of that person's body. And so I feel that strange sensation again. So I find the whole thing very fascinating. I can tell you though that Alan Shore, and I don't know about the neurobiological community in general, but I know Alan has a bias against the teletherapy because of the importance of body-to-body stuff. I don't feel that way at all, and a number of other people in the community anybody who's done the teletherapy, I think, has the sense that not only does it not inhibit emotional expression in the other person, but sometimes I really do think it facilitates it in the way that you were talking about.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that why does Alan Shore is objecting it?
I think because it's too piecemeal. You don't have the whole body. It's not whole body to whole body. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I suspect that is why he really doesn't seem to want to entertain it.
In a few minutes, I will go to the other part, speaking about the possibility of measuring our physiological measures like ectodermal activity. But just beforehand, I'm kind of envy you that you have this interpersonal neurobiology group or community. In which way are you meeting, or how does it work?
Well, he has a study group that he's had for years. That's a couple of times a month. And so I've been part of that for more than 10 years. I actually originally approached him because I was trying to get a book published that combined chaos theory, complexity theory, and fractal geometry with clinical practice. And the publisher Wiley said, "We'll only do it if you create a science imprint for us. And we need somebody really famous." This was years ago. This was probably 2006 or so. And I approached Alan, and he said yes. And then Wiley rejected his clinical book, which was probably the stupidest thing they've ever done. And so the whole thing fell apart. He then became the editor he took over for Dan Siegel and became the editor for Norton. And then I basically published that first book with Routledge, and then everything else, mostly everything else with Norton. So there's a very strong interpersonal neurobiology community here. And I too lead a clinical intuition group. I used to lead two groups, that one and a nonlinear science group, but now I've combine them into one. And so I have my own little tribe of people that are combining interpersonal neurobiology with creativity and intuition. And part of another hat that I wear is I curate an exhibition of psychotherapist art on a yearly basis in Los Angeles. It's now going into year 7, and we have international, national, we have visual arts, we have performing arts. We had almost 100 artists in the last time. And so it's a fabulous, for me, it's as an artist, I also illustrate my own books. Fabulous combination, because many psychotherapists, not just psychologists, but all sorts of psychotherapists have side interests that are creative, whether they do poetry or they photography or paint or draw or whatever. And I think that these talents cross-fertilize one another and certainly contribute to intuitive style that each person has. Because I think each clinician has a different style of tapping into creativity. And so the people in my group are particularly interested in the interface between intuition, neurobiology, and creativity.
Interesting. And still regarding intuition, do you think we can develop intuition? Is there a way one could try to enhance his ability to feel the other?
Absolutely. So my first book on the topic was Clinical Intuition in Psychotherapy, the Neurobiology of Embodied Response, and that's like a textbook. And I had the fantasy that every training program should use it because I really believe that it's at the heart of things. But I think training programs are too entrenched in their ways, and it takes some courage to put intuition in the center. But then I wrote a workbook that accompanies that textbook. It's called Awakening Clinical Intuition, and filled with exercises and guided imageries and different ways of tapping into various components of intuition, like imagination, the senses, the body, mindfulness, etc. And so it's a little bit like fertilizing the ground that allows intuition to flower. So
is it also a Kindle book? It's one can get it in Kindle.
I believe that the textbook can be gotten in.
Yeah, the textbook I do have.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether the workbook is available because it has spaces in it to write in it and things, and I don't know that Kindle allows for that. But it's, so I'm not sure whether that one is available by Kindle. I think it may not be. I also did a coloring book called True Mindful Coloring that has content to it. And that one teaches mindfulness and at the same time as it sort of directs the coloring. And I think that also helps with the intuition. One of the most important things for developing intuition is really turning off the verbal side of the brain and not thinking so much. So anything that helps us get into flows. This is why I love yoga and I love dance, is I practice no think. And it's very effective in I'm pretty much, I go around pretty much not thinking in context only. The words emerge in the moment, but I don't think that much these days. And I think it really does facilitate intuition.
Interesting. Let's go to, if we are people who believe in the importance of the brain and the body, why won't we consider having other clues or cues about what's going in the other's body? For example,
I don't know. Why not? I don't know.
you know, I was one of the leading people in bringing biofeedback into Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Now, biofeedback is somewhat very narrow it came from learning and, Neil Miller, and it was really, it was not really interpersonal. It was very one man trying to control his body signals. But I think these days we can consider using such signals, heart rate variability. You're familiar with that? Heart rate variability.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Oh,
so
yes.
It might be interesting if we could, not always, but in a certain moments, using those sensors, maybe each of us will be connected and we can see how we are reacting to each other.
Absolutely, absolutely. This taps into my interest in nonlinear science, because heart rate variability is very much connected to it's a complexity model of health, of mental health and physical health. And the amount of physiological synchrony that people get into is both extraordinary, and we don't tend to realize it because it's subconscious, and a lot of it we can't feel. So having our heart rates in train, having our breathing in train, we do tend to notice posture, or sometimes, we could notice that. We couldn't notice, it would be harder to notice the other things without having the mechanism to be able to see it. But I agree that is absolutely happening. In fact, I have a theory about, how when people have been married for 20, 30 years and one person dies, and then the other person sometimes dies very quickly, right after, within a few months. Theory that it's not just heartbreak that is going on at an emotional level, but I happen to know that at night when couples sleep together, that they absolutely get physiologically entrained. So breathing, heart rate, etc., entrained the way that infant and mother does when infants are first born. And so I believe that we are literally resting in that synchrony, and that when one person dies, it's this incredible physical stress on the other to maintain their physiology alone. And that is why the person dies. Because sometimes it's not heartbreak, sometimes these couples have had these highly conflictual relationships, and it still can happen.
Interesting. Yeah. Do you think that if we would have measured ourselves now, there would be some synchronicity between, let's say, our hearts and maybe other measures?
I do. I can even see it. I see our postures moving together. I see our heads nodding together. I do believe that that's the case. Another project that I'm working on might interest you in this respect. I just wrote a fractal epistemology for transpersonal psychology.
Tell me a little bit more. I don't know enough about it.
Yeah, it's how to make this stuff accessible has been something I've been working on for years. But fractal geometry is, it's the geometry of nature. And most people don't know about it because it's only been discovered / invented in the 1970s. But it's really the geometry of clouds and riverbeds and the circulatory system and trees and roots and the brain and etc. And it models complexity very well. And I believe that it models boundaries very well, and that it models paradox and boundaries that are both open and closed at the same time. So the boundary between you and I, as we're talking together, is closed in the sense that you're one person and I'm another person, and we're separate with separate histories and separate trajectories. But it's also open in this way we're talking about, where we come into synchrony at multiple levels. We come into synchrony by understanding the words of each other. We come into synchrony by exchanging emotions. We come into synchrony by our bodies doing a dance together, and by probably our physiology and training. And that quality of being open and closed at the same time as a paradoxical state is not something that, if we think from a reductive point of view, we don't tend to think in those terms. We tend to think of people as separate and relationships as like 1 and 1 makes 2. But it's really much more holistic than that. And so this epistemology is an attempt to take math, the math of fractal geometry, and model transpersonal phenomena. So open channels that, for example, one of the reasons I think intuition has not been more center in our field is because of the association with paranormal events and kind of intuition, intuitives and this sort of thing, or medical intuitives. And while I don't think that that's the I don't think that paranormal stuff needs to be front and center in clinical work. I also think that every one of us, when we do very intense work with people, have stories about paranormal events. And this is a way of normalizing that and modeling it. And so I wrote a target article for the International Journal of Transpersonal Studies. And there are 14 commentaries on that paper. Physicists, mathematicians, religious study professors, psychiatrists, psychologists, etc. And we're now turning it into a book that I think Cambridge Scholars is going to publish. So I have a proposal in with them right now. And it's very exciting for me because it's a multidisciplinary look at how to understand the kind of thing we're talking about, how to model it basically, and how to model it mathematically.
Mm-hmm. How long usually, I'm jumping a little bit, how long is usually your sessions? Is it 50 minutes? Is it an hour?
50 minutes.
Uh-huh. And how do you usually terminate the hour?
By saying goodbye and getting a check? What do you mean? That's a fun question.
Well, first of all, my orientation, I was educated on a psychodynamic grounds, and then I studied CBT and biofeedback. And well, in the classical psychodynamic culture, we say, okay, the time is over, let's meet on the next day. And in the CBT arena, people are saying, okay, let's see, today we did A, B, C. Could you do next meeting C, D, E, or something like that?
Oh, yeah. No, I would never do that. That is I mean, I get wanting to review and plan ahead, but that's such a linear way of doing it. I would say the way I end each session is different for each person and each time, although I do often say time is up. However, there is a pattern that I love when it happens. I believe that there is an arc to each session, a natural arc, and usually that arc is a bit like a story arc where it starts off slowly, it comes to a crescendo, and then it naturally winds down before the end of the session. Now, that doesn't happen with everyone, and when it doesn't happen, it's often distressful to end a session. If somebody is deep in emotion right at the time we're supposed to stop, it doesn't feel good to end, although I will end. I am one who is very punctual. But a pattern that I love when it happens, it's the most profound pattern to me for when a session ends is when it wraps back around and the theme touches upon where it started. So it's like an Ouroboros, mm-hmm. or the snake that swallows its own tail. And beginning, to me, that's a very elegant pattern for a session. And it's almost an awe-producing end to be able to point that out. So I wouldn't review in a sort of a technical, analytical sense, but when that Ouroboros pattern happens, I definitely point out that we're back to the beginning, and this is a great time to see.
And how would you suggest we will finish at least the recording part of our discussion? Because I enjoyed it very much.
I did too.
What would you say to most of the people who will hear us are Israeli psychologists?
Did I say? And are they mostly in Israel, the people that will hear us?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I would like to say hi to everyone, and that I would love to come to Israel at some point. I've never been, and if anybody feels like they're part of my tribe, please invite me to come, and I would love to train and talk and meet in person or any other way. I don't mind, tell us stuff is great too. But I also would hope that people get inspired by what we're doing and consider the role of intuition in what in their daily practice, because I think the more we tune into it, it's like a neurofeedback or a biofeedback process, that the more we pay attention to intuition, the more we develop it. If we don't think about it at all, it doesn't shift. But once we tap into it and track it and pay attention to it and love it, it does tend to enhance that aspect of what we do.
Well, I'll stop the recording and we'll say a few more words, just a moment.
Okay.
And just the recording.